Andrew Brandt, former Packer executive, host of Business of Sports podcast, and a columnist, and had a recent column where he talked about, could we see the Saudi investment group buy a team in the NFL? Andrew joins us on that topic. Let me start there. We had Commissioner Silver on yesterday talking about, could the Saudis buy a team in the NBA? Michael Jordan, I think his team is up for sale, or he's talked about that. And the commissioner said you have to have a singular person. You can't have a group buy an NBA team. Could you walk us through the process if the Saudis say, we're going to spend $10 billion, we want to buy this football team, the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah, good to be with you, Dan. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. The NFL, like the NBA, requires sort of a person. I've been to NFL meetings for 10 years, and they want that person representing the team, and that has to have 30% of these total values. My point is, in talking and writing about this over the last week, is that franchise values are skyrocketing, as we know. It's extraordinary what the numbers are. In the NFL, 4 years ago, the Panthers, $2.2 billion. Last year, the Broncos, $4 billion. And now we got the Commanders at $6.05 billion. At some point, the NFL and the NBA are going to have to adjust their rules about ownership and taking institutional money. Now, institutional money could mean private equity, which is allowed in these leagues, except for the NFL. But now we talk about the Saudis. What just happened in golf shows the unlimited resources that they have, Dan. You've seen this. I mean, the problem for the PGA was not that it was Saudi, that not what it was anything to do with morals. The problem is they had unlimited resources. They weren't going away. It wasn't the AFL, wasn't the USFL, wasn't the XFL. They could buy them, and they did. And we can talk about that. But the NFL relaxing their rules on this kind of wealth funds could happen. I mean, I think we're seeing this toehold. I think the golf deal this week is a first step. I think now there's, maybe credibility is too strong a word, Dan, but now there's this feeling, okay, they're in golf. Qatar hosted the World Cup. They're in Formula One. They own Newcastle United. It's not a stretch to see them get in the core four American sports, even the NFL.
Well, it takes me back to when the commissioners would all say in unison, no sports team will be in Vegas.
Yeah.
And we see what's happening now, and there'll be an NBA franchise in Vegas. You already have the Raiders there, the Oakland A's looking to move there. But what sport do you see as maybe next for this Saudi investment group to try to purchase, get involved with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you had Silver on yesterday. He had those comments, but I do think it's that one. They have relaxed their rules to allow for sovereign wealth funds. And sovereign wealth funds could include the public investment fund in Saudi Arabia. It can't anytime soon. But yeah, when we talk about NBA franchises getting to $3 billion, getting to $4 billion, the Phoenix Suns, Matt Ishbia, there's only a cadre of multi-billionaires out there to do this. Let me tell you this, Dan, the Commanders, Josh Harris, of course, he owns the Sixers, he owns the Devils. He's still, they're still vetting him, and there's issues with all these other. I know a person in DC, I'm from there, and a well-to-do guy, and he said, I got a prospectus. They basically wanted $100 million for, I could get good tickets. I mean, what is he going to get out of $100 million? And it's not a lot. So I think at some point they're going to look to resources beyond this. And we can talk about sports washing, but this is desensitizing this whole thing.
What is next for LIV and PGA Tour? And how much involvement will the Saudis have as we move forward?
I think this is the debate that I talk about all the time in business of sports. It's the money versus the control. I think Jay Monahan did a deal where he maintains a level of control as whatever he's going to be, commissioner, CEO, having people on his board. But they got the money. They, meaning the Saudi Public Investment Fund, worth $700 billion. They are the sole investor, and they have a right of first refusal over any other investor. And I don't think I or other people are being hyperbolic when they say they bought golf. And the money is going to eventually have a lot of control. Perception is Jay Monahan retains control. There's still a PGA, but There's a to be formed entity owned by the Saudis. And that's reality from what we know about the deal terms. And I think that's extraordinary. I think their infiltration into golf in one fell swoop is extraordinary.
We're talking to Andrew Brandt, and he's the host of Business of Sports podcast. What's Aaron Rodgers making with the Jets?
This hasn't been worked out. I mean, he's got basically $100 million over 2 years. We've heard that he's deferred the bonus of $60 million to next year, but we haven't seen details of that. The bottom line is $101 million over the next 2 years. By the way, the Packers offloaded that for a player that was never going to play for them again. So good on them, but he'll make it. The question is when and how. And to me, that sort of opens up the question, will he play next year? Because if he doesn't, there's all that guaranteed money, but that's for next year.
But I was bringing this up on the show recently. Let's say the next big salary. Like what sport is going to have that salary where you go, like Shohei Ohtani? It might be a $600 million contract. And then he would be, maybe it's a 10-year, $600 million. So that's $60 million a year. When are we going to broach, in what sport, somebody making $100 million a year?
Well, if they go to the Saudi league.
Well, okay. Point made.
Lionel Messi turned down 3 years, $1.5 billion or something like that to go to Miami. But, you see the creep. Let's talk about the sport I talk about most, football. You see the slow creep with Jalen Hurts at 51 and Lamar Jackson at 52, although there's structural issues with those deals that don't make them, quote, real in the later years. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to creep up to that 60 million mark in football, but football teams have an ability to get out of these contracts that other players don't. I think, when we see Damian Lillard making 60 million in the NBA, it's real. I mean, we see future salaries, out years for Russell Westbrook at 50 something, an out year for, even Karl Towns is going to have an out year at $60 million in a couple of years. So you see where that's going when you only have this limited number of players making that.
Could you see Victor Wembanyama?
Yeah.
If he lives up to the billing. He's 18. By the time, he's 30, could he be making $100 million a year?
I think he could. I think we could have a $300 million cap in the NBA for 15 players. So I think that could happen. Now we're at a cap an apron of $180 million for 15 players, and teams are going above that.
Yeah.
So I think that could happen. And then you talk about Ohtani and baseball. What's striking to me in baseball, Dan, is the length. Trey Turner, 12 years, Bryce Harper, 11. That's guaranteed. I mean, that's not going anywhere. That's Saudi-like.
I wanted to ask you about Kyler Murray. I've been critical of the Cardinals that they jumped the gun, and I was like, you didn't need to, but they did, and now they're stuck with this. But now you start to get the sense if Arizona is going to be as bad as we think they are, they're going to have the number one pick overall, and you got Caleb Williams there. How does Arizona get out of that Kyler Murray contract?
Well, you know what I always say, these NFL contracts are really 2 years, and we'll see. We'll see if we want to keep you. What's so ironic about Kyler is he was drafted a year after they took a number one pick as quarterback, Josh Rosen. Yeah. So it could happen again. Listen, I totally believe they jumped the gun. We saw a year ago all these sort of snarky tweets from his agent, and he was playing for peanuts as a starter for 3 years. They kowtowed to him, and now they're going to deal with it. Hopefully that he's going to live up to that and get the next bump when they bring in new talent next year. But this looks like a rough year for that team.
Yeah, but I don't think that he's going to be healthy enough to put up those numbers where you go, yep, he's our guy. And if I'm Arizona and I can, reset the clock with my quarterback, they may have the top 2 picks in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll have some guaranteed money next year, but it's offset guarantee. So if he goes to another team, that comes off their financial bill. But the way that the NFL is going, they move on from these quarterbacks that don't hit it big early. Look at the Jets, of course.
I know that you're following the gambling in the NFL. Are these players Are they up to speed on what they can and can't do? And if they are they just choosing to, be naive or ignorant?
Yeah, I mean, the Isaiah Rodgers thing is the latest. It's hard to see him playing again. If they gave a year for Calvin Ridley, what are they going to do for a guy with repeated gambling? And listen, this is going to sound like I'm defending these players. I'm not. But it's in your face. DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars is the NFL sponsor. I mean, they can't go anywhere without media. I'm Business of Sports podcast sponsored by DraftKings. Let me full disclosure. I can understand players with the mixed message, like, wait a minute, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. I can't do it on my app. And I'm not defending it. But the bottom line is, you're right. The teams have to do a better job of doing this. When I was with the Packers, we were called on the carpet by the NFL because our players were in the media saying, they were going to give our defensive backs, were going to give our defensive line some DVDs or gift certificates if they held Adrian Peterson under 100 yards. I mean, we got called on the carpet for that.
Oh, boy.
And now, gambling. So it's the biggest sea change in the world of sports in the last 5 years. I mean, this was taboo. The NFL fought this in court for 10 years. Tony Romo couldn't do a fantasy football convention.
Yeah, I remember that.
And look where we are, Vegas, in your face. But yeah, players can't. It's very simple, and that will be hammered home in these meetings.
Great to talk to you again, Andrew. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Dan. Take care.
Andrew Brandt, making us smarter, former Packers executive and host of Business of Sports. Let's take a break. Got a lot of phone calls to get to.